Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "The greater the obstacle, the more glory in overcoming it. What does not destroy me makes me stronger." Nietzsche probably also once said, oh crap, I'm out of toilet paper. These two seemingly unrelated quotes brilliantly convey the same powerful message. Overcoming adversity is the key to growth. Of every known art form, as opposed to the unknown art forms such as... of every art form, video games are distinctly well poised to explore this aspect of the human experience. Conflict, adversity, challenges, and fourth synonym are certainly major components of narrative, but in video games, it is incumbent upon us to bring about resolution. When discussing the merits of a given work, we often analyze components unique to the chosen medium and how well they bolster the greater creation. Cinematography, prose, acting, sound design. Consideration is given to what art has to offer in its totality and how it is offered. Challenges are a near ubiquitous component of games. They stem logically from the interactive nature of the medium, and much like any other intrinsic component of an artistic medium, within this interactivity flies great potential. That potential is flying around like a bird. That makes no sense at all. And my analogy is now plummeting to the earth like an emu teleported into the sky because emus can't fly. Games, more so than films, television shows, and novels, are capable of evoking the emotions which accompany personal failure and success. And I wish the artistic merit of inducing said feelings successfully and in support of other creative objectives received the acclaim it deserves. Alas, I think much of the discussion about the role difficulty plays in video games is shallow. Oh, maybe I've just got long legs. The conversation too often revolves around questions which are ancillary to the point. It's difficult to say how inclusive or exclusive games ought to be if we can't even agree on what games are fundamentally. I'd like to believe there's common ground upon which we can all stand and frolic like southern hairy-nosed wombats. Look, they frolic, just... slowly, but for us to arrive upon that ever-elusive ground, we have to examine and reconstruct our existing suppositions about video games. Let's begin with an uncontroversial statement. Video games are necessarily interactive. In my opinion, if games are necessarily interactive, does this mean that they are also necessarily exclusive? If player input is required to progress through a game, and the player's inability to make the correct inputs entails the conclusion of their experience, then surely every game, even the easiest among them, is conceivably impossible to complete. To be clear, I'm not saying that every game can be failed. Indeed, fail states don't even factor into the conclusion I'm drawing. A game which sees the player walk forward to progress still demands that the player understand that objective and execute it, even if such a feat could be effortlessly achieved by a toppled houseplant. I may have to peck the bullet with my beak and say that games are exclusive to some degree, even if that degree is... one. So, if games are exclusive by their very nature, how exclusive ought they be? And on what ground could such claims be made? This is where the discussion gets really complicated, as if it wasn't already. I'm sure we can all agree that accessibility features are welcome. I don't like the idea that some people may be excluded from playing games owing to physical impairments rather than skill. Colorblind settings, rebindable controls, subtitles, all great features, none of which affect gameplay. They simply allow more people to partake in the medium. But what about features which do affect gameplay? What about difficulty settings? Some would propose that difficulty settings ought to be a part of every game, and the argument supporting this conclusion seems straightforward enough. What harm comes from the mere existence of an easier mode of play? Doesn't affect you, so what the hell do you care, you fucking jerk? Now, these observations seem fair enough at a glance, but I think they're a little reductive and not particularly productive. Games are remarkably broad, and difficulty settings do not map well onto every type of game. How do we tweak the difficulty of an action game which sees the player fight through hordes of enemies? Well, the player could be provided more health, or alternatively, the player's weapons could be made to deal greater damage to enemies. If said enemies are driven by complex AI, that too could be tweaked to further advantage the player. Maybe dodges grant more iframes. Maybe attacks are telegraphed for longer. You get the idea. Opportunities abound. Of course, implementing such tweaks would take some work, but the task is feasible. It's really no wonder difficulty settings are a fixture of these types of games. Now, how do we implement difficulty settings in a platformer which sees the player contend with a set of rigidly designed levels? Could be that easier difficulties grant the player more hit points or more time to complete each level. And, if the player simply does not have the dexterity to clear a jump, what can the developers do to help them without completely curtailing the platforming challenges? The answer is not much. Take the recent Mario games, which allow struggling players to use an incredibly forgiving power-up that imbues Mario with invincibility and longer jumps. Even with the assistance of these virtual training wheels, it's still up to the player to reach the end of the level. What more could be done to help those players? And at what point does the mitigation of difficulty equate to the complete erasure of difficulty? I've heard it said that games should allow players to skip past sections which are causing them grief, but I can't help but feel like that doesn't really address the problem. Most games get harder the further one progresses. Plus, what happens if players are allowed to skip past the introduction of a new weapon or item? How could such gaps in their skill and understanding be bridged? Just imagine how hard it would be to implement a skip function in an adventure game or RPG. Look, I'll be the first to admit that the path upon which we've been treading is long and convoluted and a little bit pedantic, but it's led us to a bountiful field filled with interesting questions. Here's one for you. Should players be allowed to determine the difficulty of the games they play? Think about it. What if the developers want to create a difficult game? What if they don't want to dedicate resources to implementing difficulty settings at the expense of other parts of their game? What if the player surmounting an intense string of challenges bolsters the story they want to tell? What if the difficulty is part of their artistic vision? To view the difficulty of a video game as arbitrary would be a mistake. There's as much to be said about the artistic merit of a good challenge as there is the utility of difficulty settings. There is no dichotomy here, even if some seem to believe otherwise. Maybe a well-designed game is one which can be played and enjoyed by virtually anybody. Perhaps good design can only emerge in games which are catered to niche audiences. I think both of these perspectives are correct, despite their seeming incompatibility. And so maybe the role difficulty ought to play in video games has no definitive answer. Maybe the question itself is just stupid. The sheer breadth of what video games have to offer is astounding, and the happy coexistence of these competing design philosophies may allow us to further understand the unique and truly wonderful merit of games as an artistic medium. Though, speaking personally, a small part of me thinks there's something magical about a game's price of admission being lifelong, debilitating carpal tunnel syndrome.